test the sound first?
Just go.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Rina, and last time I had the pleasure of teaching the sunrise meditation kind of preamble, just a bit of a context about yoga and its history. Should I look here? Okay. And from the Indian standpoint, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you today and building upon what we did last time. Yoga being the practice of presence, and having a history of roots in India, the Indus Valley. We talked about last time a little bit about how there was a kind of an orally passed down divine knowledge that wasn't necessarily named or categorized. And then over time, things became more categorized. There was a part of that knowledge that turned into more stories, and it actually took a route more into the concept of Hinduism and the religion of Hinduism. And so stories, things that you'll read about, like Krishna and Ganesha, like all of these archetypes, and for many, right, for those who are Hindu, these are God, not just symbols. And then we have also this path also that came from this, which was yoga. And yog really being the way that we pronounce it, yog sounds like yoke, Y-O-K-E, meaning unity and union. And the classification of these things, it's kind of convoluted because it's so ancient, and a lot of it, sorry, I'm like having to look over here, is convoluted because we don't know. If anybody were to ever say, like, it's 100% it was like this or that, there's really a lot of conjecture. There's amazing work that's happened thanks to archaeologists, and historians. And I cannot claim to be the expert there, but from what we understand, that's the general way that this information and practices of spirituality and self-realization came to be. We talked about a little bit how even before there's this concept of the 8 limbs of yoga, and interestingly, if we were to really zoom out, even that, right, we would call 8 limbs of yoga even modern yoga. Even though that's incredibly ancient, at least 1,000-ish years old, even that concept is still considered modern. And prior to that, there are these practices that between like the non-verbal and the verbal, there was these practices of Jnana yoga, Jnana, if we were to translate it into English loosely. And that's a knowledge seeking and a discernment. So it does feel a bit more cerebral, understanding being, non-being, and so it's more studious. We have karma yoga, which is giving yoga. Joelle has a great story on her site, on her blog, about the concept of how we would use a long spoon. So I encourage you to read that story. It's a great illustration of giving, and how when we could be limited by only trying to give to ourselves. I'll let the story speak for herself, versus giving and sharing with others, and that's the concept of karma yoga, giving to others in services of others to have self-realization, or really to just feel good. And then there is the concept of Bhakti yoga, which is a devotional type of experience where you'll hear kirtan, like if you've ever been to a kirtan. And if I think back to my own upbringing, we really did participate in a lot of kirtans. And even pluralizing it, I realized like kirtans isn't even the way, it's actually just kirtan and kirtanan. Like these are the way that even if you hear yamas and niyamas, like when we're pluralizing these words, it's interesting to me because it's a Sanskrit word that doesn't involve an S at the end. So anyway, I even have to catch myself in the experience. So these are 3 forms of yoga, and Raja Yoga or Ashtanga Yoga, all of these with the 8 limbs, is also now part of this, which has come even a bit afterwards, theoretically. And so again, we would call that even modern yoga, but what that was made for was to allow people to come to this place of realization. So is there a spiritual component to yoga? Yes, there is. In the way that it was created, yes. And where there is a bit of discussion on this, is now in the West, and why I have this conversation a lot, is that Interestingly, like I was growing up with the practices of yoga in my house that happened to be more philosophical. Just the way even like when I was given a gift even as a 6-year-old child, you know, like how we would pause and my parents would say, let's thank and be grateful first. And it was and I'm sure even in practices all over the world that was happening, but that concept and practice even was yoga. When I was actually in college and thinking maybe I'll take a yoga class, I actually thought to myself, well, I don't need to do much stretching. The fact that I could have even considered yoga as an Indian American, I like saw how it was presented to me in stretch pants and mats, and I thought I don't need to do stretching, is a really fascinating thing. And it's only now in my adult life, as I came to stress, as I was feeling like burnt out and not myself, that I'm realizing all that I was raised with was yoga, in addition to what currently exists, meaning the movement, a lot of movement-based practices. And again, I want to honor all the people who've like come before me and who are around me, and like thank you, Joelle, for giving me the space to be able to share this, because it's easy to start, you know, seeing somebody as the person who's doing this work, and it's like there's so many people who are already and have been doing this, and I just happen to also be in a place and time that where I can work for it. It seems to be nicely received, and I want to thank you for even listening. So this concept of the 8 limbs of yoga is something I wanted to share just a little bit more about today, which is, you may have heard of it. So the yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi. These are the limbs of yoga. Sounds sequential, and certainly could be, but if you were to ever read, and I would recommend Krishnamacharya and Desikacharya's work of how they describe yoga, you can come to yoga from any place, any one of the limbs, and perhaps it will then get you down into the trunk of the tree, into the roots of what yoga really is. So don't worry if you're doing a physical practice only, and you know, are you worried that you're appropriating, or, you know, all those things I know can be a lot of questions. I think it's the fact that we're all here together asking questions and educating ourselves that's important. But just to share a little bit about these 8 limbs and what they're designed to do to give us the holistic experience of yoga is the yama are what we would call restraints, I suppose, loosely translating. So these are things, and I actually have an article in Yoga Journal, which I'm very excited that just came out yesterday, and it's on ahimsa, the first of the yama, which is to practice non-harm towards self, toward direct other, and toward collective. And that's the first of the yama. There are 5 yama, and there are 5 niyama. So yama means restraint. Ni means opposite, non. So yama is restraint. Niyama, it's kind of confusing to think of it this way, is non-restraint. So these are going to be things like that are more not about holding back, but about the doing. So for example, the yama, restraint, non-harm, satya. People often will define the satya practice as truth, right? But if we're saying restraint, you don't want to restrain from truth. So it's a mistranslation. It's really, satya is saying like non-lying, non-convolution of the truth. And so that is what we could call truthfulness, which is satya. And there's more. There's asteya, there's aparigraha, there's brahmacharya, which I won't go into the details more today, but I just wanted to share. There's the restraints. There's the niyama, the non-restraints. So these are things like SAUCHA, or SAUCHA, which is a cleanliness of mind, body, spirit, etc. There is the third, which we call asana, which many of us know, or asan, and we know as the physical postures in yoga. And the next we would call pratyahara. So pratyahara is, if we're practicing these things, it organically starts to happen. It's a drawing inward, away from the senses. So for example, as I'm here and speaking with you presently, like I can feel myself going in and out of the experience. Like I'm aware of where I'm seated, I hear things, but I'm also very much here, and I can be here at the same time. And that drawing inward, away from the physical, like we can be like, oh, we need the perfect environment to do something. It needs to sound like this, smell like this, look like this. It's really, they often say that in traditional ancient times, right, and even presently, when people were following a guru, they would take them out into the middle of the street in India, and like all the activity and things that would be happening, like that's where we're going to practice meditation. Then that's where we practice, right? So the pratyahara is drawing inward of the senses. Dharana is what we would loosely translate to an effort to full concentration. So you might use like a guided meditation, for example, a light, imagining light. You might be connected with the body as you're meditating. You might say a mantra. These things are all beautiful practices on kind of yoga. It's a little more effortful because naturally we're training ourselves to get there. It takes a little more effort. Dhyana is when it becomes a little more effortless, right? Like if you can just, eventually, you might just start to feel yourself say like, I can just kind of get there. Like, don't need a lot of other stuff. And then that's leading you to a place of samadhi, which is pure connection, pure stillness. And interestingly, maha samadhi, maha always means great, like highest, you know. And mahasamadhi, when somebody dies, when somebody passes away, we call that mahasamadhi. And when you're practicing samadhi, some have asked, and I even remember asking, like, to my Indian and non-Indian teachers the same question, like, well, then are we practicing a form of death? And in some ways, what we're doing is practicing that peaceful place of non-need, non-possession of items, all of the yama, the niyama, all of those things, the convergence of all of that into a place of stillness and connection is what we're practicing in samadhi. So it creates less of a distance between us and the concept of death. And one of my favorite teachers, which Joel included and others, Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a Vietnamese activist and a Buddhist monk, who was introduced to me by a friend, Kim Simpson, which I will never ever forget, thank you. He often says that, I lost my train of thought. There's no birth. He says this, and Buddhism says this in many ways. Like we often think of death and life as these separate things, right? But we're always coexisting. Always. No birth, no death. Birth and death. It's like you can think of them as always part of the fabric of what everything is as a collective, which is where we can like reduce that element of fear of like this thing that awaits, right, in this linear future. And if we can start to bring it together and touch that. A friend of mine, Jess Givardiz, she's also a teacher, and she would often go to a place called a death cafe to talk about these things, and so that we can start to make peace with these things in a way that feels less intimidating. And we as humans may be intimidated, but we find the place of peacefulness in it. And so this concept all together, all of these limbs, were created by who we're calling like divine people into this practice, compiled by Sri Patanjali, put together so that if we're just thinking like come into yoga and stillness, it's hard sometimes, but there have now been these practices that have been created, philosophy, beautiful things we can do every day when we're seated at a table, not just on a mat, to be able to come into a place of collective presence and well-being. And so that's what I wanted to share with you today. And I hope that you received something out of this. Maybe this is just repeating something that you may have already known in the past, but I'm looking forward to sharing with you next time a little bit more. And I just invite you to take a breath in, breath out. Twice more on your own breath, feeling good in your breathing. And I hope that you have a really positive and balanced rest of your day. If you want to find the article on Yoga Journal for Ahimsa, invite you to if you Google my name, Rina Deshpande, and you Google yoga journal. I actually don't have the link yet, and I'd be happy to share that. But that's going to share more about the first of the first limbs of yoga, the yama, ahimsa, non-harm.